welcome back. And we're moving into our first conversation this morning as we find out more about the stakeholders consultation that is taking place today. And they're going to be looking at regional energy efficiency building codes. So with us on set to tell us more, we have Lloyd Orellano, who's the Standards Officer for the Belize Bureau of Standards. We have Rodolfo Gutierrez, who is the Consumer Protection Liaison Officer of the Bureau of Standards. And we have Cobb, who is a representative of the Ministry of Energy. Good morning and welcome. And thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Well, so this is a very complex topic, obviously. And the general concept of building codes, I think, is one that people are adapting to. We kind of had ad hoc development for the most part. But we know the Bureau of Standards has been working on building consistency across many different sectors. So let's talk about your relationship in terms of looking at the area of construction and building codes in general before we move into the energy efficient ones.
Sure. So currently, the way building codes are operating right now, they're being controlled by what's the local board association and the central building association. They have right now specific building codes for structural integrity and use. So what we are proposing is the adoption of international standards when it comes to energy and how that can be integrated into the building codes that is currently being practiced. So the codes that we are proposing are not, they are codes specific to this region because they're an adoption of internationally established codes. So they are not just ad hoc codes that we have come about proposing.
Yeah. And you're speaking about adopting a regional set of building codes. One would assume that would include things like exposure to hurricanes, floods. Is that what we're talking about?
When it comes to the integrity building codes, that is correct. So when it comes to what we're doing for the energy efficiency or the energy building codes, it's more as to the lighting situation, the power of a building, the type of roofing materials, the thermal envelope, the type of insulation that goes into the walls. Those are the proposed codes that we're proposing.
Like appliances.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, I want to bring it over to the Bureau of Standards and just talk a bit. Obviously, you have been able to disseminate this information to the stakeholders already. And this consultation is, in effect, a way for you to get feedback. Since you have put out the information, have there been any immediate concerns that have been expressed?
No, so far, hence one of the reasons why we're doing it as a consultation today, that we're inviting relevant parties to attend. Not only those directly affected, such as what Mr. Cobb said in terms of the central building authority, the local building authorities, but you also have other entities such as, for example, the lending institutions such as DFC in their finance department. It's very important that they understand what are the requirements in regards to whatever energy efficiency and programs that they have in place. So we have a wide range or a balance of representation today. And what we want most is to get the feedback, because a lot of the times you find out that at the end of the day, people say, well, I did not know, or why wasn't I a part of it? So this is what happens all the time. So just to put into perspective, it's a regional project. It's from the CARICOM. So we have the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality, and we are partners with CrossQ. All right. So whatever standards that are being adopted at the regional level, we are obliged as a country to adopt them at the national level. All right. So this is why it is very important for us to be or to contribute to the process while it's still in development, rather than having to implement something when it has already been established. Yeah.
Now, I want to get to Rodolfo for a bit, because obviously you are the ones who get all the excuses that say, well, I didn't know that the codes had changed. And taking this opportunity to be able to review the draft document, what are you expecting from stakeholders to be some of the concerns? When we talk about making any types of shift in construction especially, I'd imagine some of the things are definitely cost. Secondly, availability of materials is also. So let's talk about some of the things that you think will be a major shift, or a shift that people will be perhaps needing some time to adjust to.
Okay, well, we envision today with the listing of stakeholders that we have in place is, I believe that we will have a dynamic type of consultation today. As mentioned by my colleague here, we have a wide array of stakeholders, which includes people like even suppliers and contractors, suppliers of materials, and we have even architects, I mean, you name it within the area. So one area of interest, as I spoke to one of the stakeholders confirming attendance, is they're excited about these changes in the air conditioning industry, in terms of especially with the new technologies that are coming out, and the adaptation of our country to these new technologies, this go green approaches. So that's just one of the areas suppliers too, being amenable to probably changes in terms of the type of standards for wiring and what have you within the sector, to make it more user friendly, and besides that more energy efficient and stuff like that. No.
Mm-hmm. And why is it important that we are energy efficient? Why?
One of the main reasons you want to be energy efficient is for costs. Okay. You want to reduce your costs. Being energy efficient is not just for the green movement that's going along globally.
Which should be good enough.
Which is good enough, yes.
Just so we can say that.
But primarily it is to reduce your cost, to reduce your per unit cost. Right. Yeah. So that's your primary reason.
And that is where the subject is sold, because everybody would ask, what's in it for me?
Yeah.
Right. So if you cut costs, then it's better for me.
And I'm curious because, okay, you said cost efficiency, right? Mm-hmm. Cutting costs. But wouldn't it be a little bit more expensive to purchase materials that we aren't already using, materials that are maybe a little bit more foreign to us?
So yes, so that is one of the implications. Introducing energy efficient technologies and building codes does require a higher capital cost. Mm-hmm. But when you go into planning, it now reduces your overall running costs, maintenance costs, and operating costs.
Yeah, it's having more of a long-term vision, and it's expensive to move into any particularly new venture. If I want to extend my establishment and build, I think a lot of times perhaps that area, being able to invest more from the start and being energy efficient is a bit of a concern and a change for people. And that's why I was asking where I think where you see some of the...
And this initial cost, sometimes it's just for a transition period, because we might not have the materials in country. They're emerging technologies. Yeah. So with the prolonged use and the much wider adaptation of these practices, the actual cost might be reduced. Okay. So in the longer run, your actual investment might equal the same investment they're doing now.
Okay.
Especially if the materials are more available. Let's talk some specifics. Mm-hmm. So what would a more energy efficient building look like compared to what we do have in the country right now?
So the two primary reasons are climate adaptation, such as refrigeration and ACs, and lighting.
Okay. So we know, we've heard many times, switch to the energy efficient bulbs, and then you always hear people say, oh, but it's so expensive. And usually the sales pitch is, it lasts longer, it's energy efficient. So that's, I'd imagine, a part of the lighting shift. Yes. What about the AC and the refrigeration?
So when it comes to AC, we're starting to move from what is called the traditional ACs, which are the stop-go ACs, to now which are called the inverter ACs, and more climate friendly, which is not as polluting as the old ACs.
Mm-hmm. And similarly, inverter air conditioners are a bit more expensive, but should reduce your consumption of electricity as well.
Correct.
Now, you pointed out something that I think is also a crucial area. You're talking about also a skill set that is new in the country as well. In other words, if I'm an electrician and I'm accustomed to putting in a single unit or a split unit in a house, and that's really where my area of expertise is, how do I then learn, or what will be some of the mechanisms in place to ensure that you have certified persons installing these new energy efficient equipment?
That's one of the reasons that many of the stakeholders we're inviting here today are also training institutions, and also plays a bigger role of what the Ministry of Public Service, Energy and Public Utilities has, in doing training programs so as to allow the current skill sets to upgrade their skills to be adapted to the new workforce that's coming along.
And generally, you find that once you have new emerging technologies, then of course you have to adapt to the changes.
Force yourself to adapt to the situation.
Yeah. We saw that with the welders when they had to get a specific certification. So you go into your consultations today with your stakeholders. You'll have, as you mentioned, architects, contractors, you'll have suppliers, you'll have people from the building authorities, I'd imagine as well. And you get their feedback. Now, this is a regional set of codes. So how much input will the stakeholders have today in being able to perhaps tweak what Belize will adapt?
Well, the main objective, first and foremost, is to get whether they think that it is something that Belize can comply with or not. If we have major or significant comments with regards to one of the requirements, let's say, then of course our responsibility is to channel that to the region, to the regional project team that will look at those comments for Belize and see whether they will accept or not accept those comments. So it is very important that we provide that feedback, because at the end of the day, we do not want to approve a document that our stakeholders cannot meet. So we have to provide Belize's position on the document. Now again, it's a highly technical document which requires really professionals, engineers, architects, people like that to be able to really provide feedback. I would say I am just facilitating the process. I am not the
Are you saying you still don't understand the draft fully yet?
We are.
But with the help, this is why I love my job, because at the end of the day, I get to learn a lot of these things by way of the exchanges that I have with the stakeholders and also via the technical document.
And the regional project team, are we just talking about CARICOM, the Caribbean?
CARICOM.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, in this experience of having done your own individual revisions, let's talk about some of the areas that will be impacted, and I mean in terms of specific sectors. Building codes in general, are we talking residences? Are we talking commercial businesses? What are we looking at?
So today we'll be focusing on two main sectors, the commercial sector and the residential sector. Most of the new construction that's happening in Belize right now is happening in the commercial sector. So this is the perfect time to come in to review any existing codes. And being that next year is actually an international revision year for energy efficiency codes, it provides the correct timing, the right timing to come in and do these types of modifications and adaptations.
What are some of the building codes that are currently in the draft that, as a representative of the Ministry of Energy, you would really love to see be implemented in new constructions in the country?
The primary one would be for air conditionings and cooling. Those are the ones that create the most load and at times the most waste. So it's that plus the building envelope, which is leakages. Where you have open areas, windows that have spaces in between them, where
when you walk past a building, you feel cool air
cool,
from
exactly.
inside. Oh, that's not a part of what you're And if you are to look ahead, if the stakeholders today agree and say, you know, we can meet these targets, we can have a timeline to roll out and meet the objectives, are you looking at also redoing older buildings to be able to have them more energy efficient, or are we just looking at new constructions?
So there's two sections to that as well, for new buildings and for whenever an old building is being retrofitted or adapted. It does not mean that you have to go in and modify an old building.
Okay. So unless I want to do repairs to my house, then I'll have to meet the energy efficient building codes.
Correct.
Okay.
And so shifting away from commercial buildings, what about residential homes? Because I'm not sure, but I don't know that a lot of residential homes actually have like AC units. So how are we going to now modify the building codes for residences, for personal residences?
So currently right now residences, specifically in the Belize City and the Belmopan areas, they need to get authorization from their local building authorities and central building authorities. Within those codes, they do specify specifically things such as electrical loads and electrical outlets where they might not have ACs right now, but in their plans it's already prescribed that in the future they have the provisions for that. And being that they have the provisions for that, the plans will also have to meet those building codes and wiring codes.
Okay. And are those codes adhered to for the most part? Because I don't know. I'm just going off what I see. I see most of the time people, you build a house and that's that. But I'm not sure if there's any consultation with like the building codes. Does that happen or?
Well, yes, because whenever you do submissions to these building authorities, you need to have a licensed architect or engineer sign off on them. And that's one of the reasons that we're inviting those specific architects and engineers to be part of this consultative process.
Okay.
And what of energy audits? I know it was a very fascinating process when DFC was here to tell us about their energy efficiency line. And they talked about having people go in and audit just how much energy you're using, where the wastage is taking place. Is this perhaps a part of what is integrated in rolling out the building codes? Is that?
So yes, so within the broader Ministry of Public Service, Energy and Public Utilities, we do offer training and certain services specifically for public buildings for energy auditing. And it's a result of the energy audits and the building codes is how to then adopt the different technologies or the different recommendations that you have so as to reduce your load.
Now let's talk of what the Bureau of Standards role will be in the review of the codes and if we move to adopting them.
Yeah, our basic role is actually in terms of facilitating the process as what we are doing now. And eventually when the document has been finalized at the regional level, finalized and approved at the regional level, then our obligation is to establish them at the national level. One of the major challenges would be, I think we mentioned it earlier, is change. And the word change, I refer to implementation, because we have to ensure that we establish a level playing field and ensure that everybody is actually implementing the code.
Yeah.
So that would be the greatest challenge that we're going to have.
Well, I would imagine. And I want to ask that because if there are codes established, and obviously the Bureau of Standards has a role in being able to ensure that there's adherence, but you also have the Central Building Authority and you also have the Local Building Authority. And amidst themselves, sometimes there's a bit of confusion as to whose area they should be working in. So how will those lines be defined as to whether Bureau of Standards will monitor Central Building Authority or Local Building Authority?
Yeah, so I'm very glad that you mentioned that, because at the end of the day, they have the actual authority at the end of the day. We can only provide at the end of the day what are the standards or the specifications and try to ensure as much as possible we have collaboration and there exists that partnership to ensure that at the end of the day you have an established playing field in terms of as far as the standards go, in terms of the technical requirements. All right, so we have that obligation. But as the competent authority in this area, then it would then be the Central Building Authority along with the
So
local
they will be the ones
authorities.
doing the monitoring and whatnot, follow up on stuff. We will probably do the technical adjustments in terms of standards or whatever.
Yeah.
If any changes should be recommended or whatever.
Okay.
Correct.
And so after today's consultation, everything is good to go. You get amazing feedback. What happens next?
Well, what happens next is that the consultations that we're having here is actually happening in all of the 15 CARICOM member states.
Oh, okay.
So what will happen is that everybody will submit their comments to the regional project team. They will consider those comments and try to see how they amend the document to reflect. But of course, whatever change that if we are going to request any, has to be based on scientific justification. We cannot just, because I feel like, it's a scientific justification that we have to provide that we need a change in the document. So provided that there's consensus at the end of the day, then the document, a final draft is produced. And we're hoping to achieve a final draft by December of this year.
Yeah.
So the draft would be completed by December. Line you're looking at, from reviewing the draft, finalizing the draft, to perhaps an adaptation of the code.
Well, we are looking at perhaps by in April of next year to have the approved already. That's we're working very fast on this project here, very fast. So
Now there's certain nuances, obviously, when you talk about the reality in, let's say, Barbados, in islands that are closer to the U.S. in terms of cost of getting some of these materials, and of course the uniqueness of Belize as well. From what you have learned from the regional body, I mean, how tailored will the final draft be in being able to accommodate the needs of all the different countries across CARICOM.
So you rightfully said it so. It's not going to be specific to a specific country.
Yeah.
It's trying to reach that middle ground where everybody can agree.
Yeah.
So that no one country is at an advantage or worse, at a disadvantage.
Yeah. What I haven't heard you mention so far, which I think is interesting, is energy sources as a part of the building codes. You know, if we're looking at perhaps encouraging within the new building codes, setting up solar panels or alternative sources of energy. Is that included?
Yes, of course. Solar water heaters is one of the
solar water heaters is one of the recommendations that we're doing for water entrance. But when it comes specific to, say, solar panels, we are dealing with that issue on a separate issue right now in conjunction with the Public Utilities Commission, where we are looking at modifying and creating regulations for what we call distributed generation, so that both commercial and residential buildings can then generate their own power.
And what happens if today the stakeholders tell you, you know, this is going to be far too expensive for us to be able to adopt? Or just very difficult because we don't have the expertise in the country? It doesn't have to be expense.
If we do reach that extreme situation, I believe there are certain provisions that we can do, whether to delay the adaptation of these codes or best seek modification of these codes.
And in comparison to the rest of the world, where are we in, and when I say we, I'm referring to CARICOM, how far ahead are other areas in the world, other regions in the world, in creating and implementing these energy efficient building codes?
So currently internationally, big countries such as the US, Mexico, and large of these productive nations are in adherence with what's called the IEEC building codes, which are past building codes. We are somewhat playing the catch-up game, but next year, the building codes that we are proposing are actually current building codes, which are 2018 building codes, so we would then be right up to par with them.
Now, you speak about opening up the consultations and hoping to be able to review the entire document as well. And there are obviously many different stakeholders that are essential in being able to move into this direction. Will there be, and you have to tell me if it's included in the code, perhaps certified persons who will be authorized to construct energy efficient buildings? In other words, obviously everybody has their different areas of expertise. Is there a special certification process? And I'm not just talking the electrician, but your actual builders. Is that included?
No, not within the building codes themselves. Again, this is still lies within the regulator's powers. So it will still be the Central Building Authority for Structural and Design and the Public Utilities Commission when it comes to electrical loads.
Now the larger issue here, I believe, is really looking at issues regarding climate change and where we all fit in being able to do our part. If you look at some of the wastage that happens in Belize, and you pointed out the AC, we pointed out the electricity, even in the construction itself, sometimes they're very wasteful practices. Is this also addressed within the codes?
Yes, so this is addressing the codes with when it comes to the type of materials that you've been using. When it comes to practices, that is again left to the enforcement of regulators and the actual builders themselves.
Now, what is your sense in terms of being able to make this move? I know Belize Bureau of Standards has been working towards having Belize adapt to many different international codes and kind of getting us the quality standards that all Belizeans deserve. It also, of course, improves access to business and even interest from outside, from investors in terms of what they can do and what they can expect in the landscape in Belize. So talk about it from the Bureau of Standards standpoint, where we're looking at adopting these specific codes.
Yeah, so it's very important that you mentioned that, Marlene, because then going back to again the change that would be required, you already have regulations, regulations in country that does reference specific technical requirements for buildings. However, the change would be where you would have to then amend those regulations to actually reference these standards, or you can adapt them wholly. But one of the mindsets that we have in Belize is that if it's not regulated, well, I won't implement it.
Yeah.
Right? So we always find that cultural mindset in Belize in regards to standards and quality. But as you go along, the regulations, which we call technical regulations because they reference technical requirements in the regulations, so those would then actually reference these building codes. So once that is done, we clearly have established some type of partnership in order to reference the standards or to implement the standards. So it's very, very important. So in reviewing the regulation, there is no need to reinvent the wheel. The standards are already there.
Yeah.
It's just as simply think how we're going to implement it at the national level. And of course, I think we mentioned it from the beginning that we are referencing mostly the international building codes. In most of the cases, well, of course, we try to modify it in a way that Belize would be able to implement it. But again, we are not straying as far away from what the international best practices are.
Yeah, yeah. What would be the, when you speak of moving towards the international standards and you look at the Belizean context, what would be, I think, something too far-reaching if you were to look at the international standards when it comes to the building codes for Belize?
Too far-reaching or something that we would have to do in gradual steps specifically is building codes and building materials. So as with Belize and CARICOM Nation, we are heavily reliant on building with concrete, which is not specifically the standard in other international communities. But the code does allow for you to do modifications to it.
Okay, so it's not along international standards to build with concrete, but then...
No, it's not that it's not along with international standards. It's not international practices.
Yeah. Okay, so because when you said that, I was thinking, well, we live in the tropics. We have hurricanes all the time, so maybe we can't use... But what would be advised then, or what do they use as opposed to the concrete buildings?
Well, what a lot of international communities use is steel frame and plaster boards and plywood type envelopes.
Okay.
But we're not there yet. Let's not scare your stakeholders. Your stakeholders are saying, what? Let me get to the built more now.
We want them to get there.
So let's get into the details of the consultations today. Obviously, you've sent out your invitations. Is it open to the public if people are interested in coming in?
They're interested to come, they can come.
Yeah. So tell us the details, Rodolfo, of today.
It will commence around 8:30 this morning at the Biltmore Plaza. We intend to do an entire day's consultation session. We will present the documentation to everyone, and then from there we're going to be dissecting the document and doing some breakout sessions with the different sectors, and then try to establish some comments at the ending of the day. Like my colleague rightfully said, the compilation of the comments is key in this consultation process, so that we may be able to present Belize's position on the draft document itself. Okay.
And as you pointed out, while it is a very technical document, you've already passed it out, and so far there hasn't been any immediate feedback.
No, not as yet.
But I think Lloyd was very clear in saying it's when it's explained, it's a lot different.
And so what are some of the negative feedbacks that you are expecting then?
I actually, in my work, I do not expect negative feedback. I like positive feedback, but nevertheless, we usually get feedback. For example, the costs. You have.
I think that would be one of the primary concerns. Would probably be cost, not necessarily. Well, it would probably be both for maybe importers or maybe even the regular user of residential customers.
Being mindful is that when you talk about standards, it will require a change. Yeah. And that change will definitely have some cost implications. Yeah. Right, so it's something trivial to ask anyway.
Well, I believe eventually what will happen is that I think a part of making decisions for energy efficient technologies and what have you, policymakers need to be in concord. They need to concord with these type of situations too, and understand that there are some concerns in terms of meeting new technologies and maybe the initial costs, like my colleague mentioned here, in terms of getting these energy efficiency systems in. So that is something that probably the government might have to consider. Quite right.
And so far, it's kind of been on their own initiatives. Some of the businesses, some of the buildings that have made shifts towards being more energy efficient. As I mentioned, DFC does have a specific credit line for making that shift as well. Are there any incentives in terms of being able to take your own initiative to shift to a more eco-friendly type building?
The largest incentive is reducing your costs, reducing your running costs. That's one of the
pay money to save money.
That's one of the primary reasons why these private businesses are going in that direction.
And I like DFC's approach to the matter. What you're saying is that basically the savings that you're getting on utilizing solar water heaters will be what will be utilized to pay back your loan on the item itself. No?
What type of costs are you talking about if we were to take a building and retrofit it with inverter ACs and proper lighting, energy efficient lighting? What's some of the cost savings that you're talking about there?
So just when you go, say, from traditional incandescent light bulbs to your LED light bulbs, you're talking about a savings of 80 to 90% in running costs. Just to show you how adaptation drives prices as well, 3 to 4 years ago, an LED bulb in Belize would have cost you $30 Belize. Now that we're getting importers sensitized to this, you can now find LEDs as cheap as $9 Belize now.
Okay.
And if you look at that same shelf right beside it, the CFL, the traditional little spiral bulbs, they're running for $5 to $12 Belize. So the price point difference is not that big. And we expect those prices to continue to reduce.
Yeah.
And the LED has more longevity than your regular bulb.
Right.
Okay, good. And it's also a business opportunity, I suppose, for materials that will be necessary if we move to when we move to the rollout phase, right? Yes. You mentioned some building materials, insulation. I know there are inverter ACs. We know that there are the LED bulbs. What are some of the other business opportunities that you foresee in terms of having to bring in energy efficient materials?
So we see primarily when it comes to the actual design of the buildings themselves now. So you'll have much more technical designs and systems designed specifically to a building instead of ad hoc adaptation of different necessities.
Okay. All right. So all are invited, especially those who feel that they may be potentially impacted or have an interest, to the stakeholder consultations today at the Biltmore Plaza. Starts at
8:30.
8:30. Okay. Well, thank you for coming in and sharing with us what you have on your agenda for today, and best of luck.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
We're going to go ahead and take a break now, and when we come back, we'll be talking about the upcoming Street Games tournament. So stay tuned.